I would see that she was still breathing, and I'll be like, Johnny, she's still alive. What the heck? And then, like, Johnny finally, like made the, like, last blow, and it was kind of creepy, because she was, like, scared.
This police body camera footage from April 8th, 2017, shows officers arriving at a quiet home in Lawrenceville, Georgia, for a routine welfare check. Neighbors were concerned because they hadn't seen the elderly couple who lived there for days. What officers discovered inside would become one of the most disturbing family murder cases in Georgia history. The victims had been dead for a week, and their killers had been living in the house, throwing parties while the bodies decayed in the next room. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear. This is True and Twisted, where family bonds become deadly betrayals. 17-year-old Cassandra Bjorge and her 19-year-old boyfriend, Johnny Hyro Ryder. To anyone who saw them, they looked like typical teenagers in love. But behind their young faces was something so cold and calculating that they could murder people and then party in the same house where the bodies were decomposing. What makes this case even more chilling is that these weren't random victims. Wendy and Randall Bjorge were 63-year-old grandparents who had opened their home and hearts to their troubled granddaughter, only to be found in a brutal condition. Wendy and Randall Bjorge seemed to be living a peaceful retirement in their Lawrenceville, Georgia home. Both 63 years old, they had worked hard their entire lives and were enjoying their golden years together. They were the kind of grandparents every child should have, loving, supportive, and always willing to help a family in need. When their granddaughter Cassandra needed a place to stay, Wendy and Randall opened their doors without hesitation. They wanted to provide stability for the troubled teenager and give her a chance to get her life on track. From the outside, it appeared to be a heartwarming story of grandparents stepping in to help raise their granddaughter. The couple was known in their neighborhood as kind, quiet people who kept to themselves and never caused any trouble. But beneath this picture-perfect arrangement, something sinister was brewing. Cassandra was not the grateful granddaughter Wendy and Randall hoped she would become. Instead, she was planning something unthinkable with her boyfriend Johnny. Cassandra Bjorge was 17 years old and had been living with behavioral problems for years. She had moved in with her grandparents, but instead of appreciating their care and support, she began to resent their rules and authority.
I guess let's start from scratch about what happened, starting from when you ran away, I guess.
I didn't really run away. My grandma, like, kicked me out.
Okay.
And I came home because, it was time for curfew, because I didn't want to violate my probation. So I came home, and my grandpa was asleep, and my grandma got really mad at me, and she was, like, saying, like, oh, if you don't like it here, we're just going to find somewhere else for you to stay.
Her boyfriend, 19-year-old Johnny Hyro Ryder, was equally troubled. Together, they formed a toxic relationship that would ultimately lead to something horrifying. Rather than seeking help for their problems or finding constructive ways to deal with their issues, they began plotting against the elderly couple who had tried to help Cassandra. The exact motive for what happened next remains unclear, but what is certain is that these two teenagers decided that Wendy and Randall Bjorge had to die.
He first asked me, are you afraid to die?
Mm-hmm.
And I said no. And then I asked them, are you afraid to die? And he said no. And he asked me, he was like, would you kill your grandparents? I fought them,
In April 2017, Cassandra and Johnny put their deadly plan into action. According to court testimony, they waited until they could catch the grandparents off guard, then launched a brutal attack that would shock even seasoned investigators. The attack was planned and coordinated. Johnny began the assault by attacking Randall Bjorge with a tire iron, beating the 63-year-old man with the heavy metal tool. Meanwhile, Cassandra dragged her grandmother Wendy into the same room and restrained her with duct tape before joining in the beating. The violence was excessive and prolonged. Both victims suffered blunt force trauma from the tire iron attacks. But the teenagers weren't finished. After beating the elderly couple, they stabbed them multiple times with knives. The final act of brutality was the most horrific. According to the medical examiner's report, both Wendy and Randall Bjorge died from incisions to the throat. Their throats were slit by the teenagers they had tried to help. The murders were complete, but what happened next would shock investigators even more than the crimes themselves. After brutally murdering Wendy and Randall, most killers would flee the scene immediately. But Cassandra and Johnny made a different choice. They decided to stay in the house with the decaying bodies of their victims. For an entire week, the teenagers lived in the Bjorge home while Wendy and Randall's bodies decomposed in the next room. But they weren't just hiding out. They were actively celebrating their crimes. According to police reports, Cassandra and Johnny threw parties at the house during that week. They invited friends over, played music, and acted as if nothing had happened while their victims' bodies were rotting nearby. The callousness required to party in a house with decomposing murder victims defies comprehension. These weren't hardened criminals. They were teenagers who seemed to feel no remorse whatsoever for what they had done. The discovery came when concerned neighbors contacted police for a welfare check. Wendy and Randall hadn't been seen for days, and people in the neighborhood were worried about the elderly couple. When officers arrived at the house on April 8th, 2017, they found Cassandra and Johnny inside, but no sign of the grandparents. The teenagers' behavior immediately raised suspicions. They were evasive and couldn't explain where Wendy and Randall were. A search of the house revealed the horrific truth. Both victims were found dead, their bodies in an advanced state of decomposition. The medical examiner determined they had been dead for approximately 1 week, the same week that Cassandra and Johnny had been living in the house and throwing parties. The evidence against the teenagers was overwhelming. The murder weapons were found at the scene, along with physical evidence linking both Cassandra and Johnny to the crimes. But instead of surrendering quietly, the teenage killers made one final dramatic gesture that would seal their fate forever. When police moved to arrest them, Cassandra and Johnny attempted a joint suicide, trying to kill themselves before they could be taken into custody. The attempt failed, and both were hospitalized before eventually being charged with murder. The SWAT standoff that preceded their arrest only added to the drama and showed that even when facing capture, the teenagers remained defiant and unwilling to take responsibility for their actions. Due to the severity of the crimes, prosecutors initially considered seeking the death penalty against Johnny, who was 19 and legally an adult. Cassandra, being 17, would not face execution, but could still receive life in prison. The case revealed that this wasn't going to be the end of their killing spree. During the investigation, police discovered that Cassandra and Johnny had planned to commit more murders. They had intended to kill Johnny's parents next, but those plans were interrupted by their arrest.
The plan was that we were both gonna get both of our families. And he was like, let's be Bonnie and Clyde.
The revelation that the grandparents were just the first in a planned series of murders showed the true depth of the teenagers' depravity and violence. Rather than face trial and the possibility of the death penalty, both Cassandra Bjorge and Johnny Ryder eventually decided to plead guilty to all charges. In February 2018, both teenagers appeared in court and admitted to murder, aggravated assault, and theft in connection with the brutal deaths of Wendy and Randall Bjorge. The judge sentenced both to life in prison. Cassandra received 2 life sentences, while Johnny also received 2 life sentences. Given their ages at the time of sentencing, Cassandra was still 17 and Johnny was 19. Both will likely spend the rest of their lives behind bars. The case left the Lawrenceville community shocked and heartbroken. Wendy and Randall Bjorge had been quiet, law-abiding citizens who had simply tried to help their troubled granddaughter. Their reward for that kindness was brutal murder at the hands of the very people they were trying to support. The case also highlighted the dangers of toxic relationships and how troubled teenagers can enable each other's worst impulses. Neither Cassandra nor Johnny might have committed murder alone, but together they created a deadly combination that cost two innocent people their lives. The image of the teenagers partying in the house while their victims' bodies decayed remains one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. It showed a level of callousness and lack of empathy that shocked even experienced investigators. The Cassandra Bjorge and Johnny Ryder case serves as a chilling reminder that age doesn't protect us from evil, and that some of the most dangerous killers can hide behind young, innocent-looking faces. It also stands as a tragic example of how grandparents' love and generosity can be repaid with unimaginable cruelty. Wendy and Randall Bjorge opened their home to help their granddaughter, and that act of kindness ultimately cost them their lives. The case devastated a community and left family members struggling to understand how two teenagers could commit such brutal crimes against people who had only shown them love and support. Today, both killers remain in prison, where they will likely spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes. The house where Wendy and Randall lived and died has become a painful reminder of how family bonds can be twisted into something deadly. Remember their names: Wendy and Randall Bjorge, grandparents who died trying to help the granddaughter they loved. And remember that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the teenagers living under your own roof.